Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Didn't pursue a career in nursing because of the heartache. Nobody does. You enter with the intention of helping individuals recover, mending injuries, keeping an eye on vital signs, and promoting important medications. You spend countless hours in nursing school learning lab values, perfecting the art of inserting IVs, and having every protocol ingrained in you until you become an expert in clinical knowledge. However, not a single textbook or lab or simulation helped me understand what it's like to be silent in a room when someone has just passed away, particularly when you weren't certain they were by themselves. I had spent 7 years at Westall Medical Center. This mid-sized hospital is located just outside Kingston, New York, between I-87 and the Hudson River. I worked the third-floor day shift, primarily on post-op and palliative cases, what we referred to as the quiet side. That morning featured the type of quiet that only becomes apparent after the commotion has passed. No quick answers, no codes. There weren't many overhead pages. Only once every half hour did the phones ring. You could hear the above intercom crackling sometimes and the shuffling of nursing shoes. The sun streamed over the wax linoleum in sweeping, warm stripes through the east windows. 3 patients were my task for the day. Margaret Delaney, a long-term palliative in room 313, a new colostomy, and a pneumonia patient we were attempting to scale down. We had known Mrs. Delaney for a month or so. End-stage ovarian cancer. She was 78 years old, tall, quiet, and the patient type that made you want to stay in her room a little longer. She inspired you to do so, not because you had to. 6 years had passed since her husband's death. Under her gown, she wore his ring on a chain. Additionally, each time I checked on her, I would see it if you moved her to the center line. The words, "All my love, T," are carved inside an ancient gold piece that has been smoothed with time. She hasn't spoken much in recent days, but she used to occasionally chat. "Nah," she said once the week before. "You think people wait for us? I mean after." As I adjusted her PCA pump, I looked up. She gave a little, weary grin and said, "If they loved us, I think they do." After that, he's sitting on a bench someplace, sipping coffee and working on that blasted crossword puzzle. It had been Tuesday since she last opened her eyes. Now it was Friday. Carol, her daughter, had come up from Texas and was spending almost all of her time at the hospital. Carol was someone I liked. She didn't micromanage, be demanding, or insist on getting additional medication every hour. She simply sat with her mother, reading aloud from a battered old book of poetry or softly stroking her hand. We kept a clinical eye on the end, reduced appetites, final agitation, modeling, and Cheney Stokes. Breathing, however, it begins to feel as though there is something other in the room during those final 24 hours. Not ghosts, please, not in the dramatic sense. That's not all there is to it. A change in the atmosphere, a strain behind your eyes. Have you ever been in a room with someone watching you? When a patient is near death, it feels as though someone else is present, just outside of your line of sight. A dozen times I've seen it. It can occasionally be an unexpected smell, tobacco in the absence of smokers. No one is wearing the rose perfume. It can be movement at times, shadows that change while no one is around. If you haven't worked with other nurses long enough, you don't discuss it with them. If not, you sound insane. The time was 1:42 p.m. that day. the final time I went into Margaret's chamber. Since I had tracked the final PCA dose just before taking over, and the clock was directly over her door, I can recall the exact moment. Carol had gone to get coffee in the cafeteria. Margaret's respiration was irregular, deep, and slow. I checked her 4 lines, straightened her hair, and adjusted the blanket. Her gaze remained motionless, closed. She had nice fingertips. Then something was different. I sensed the shift as I pulled the blanket just under her chin. My arm's hair stood up. The room felt warm, but there was a cold. It's the sort of cold that doesn't feel like cold. It has the feel of being gone. She then took calm, deliberate steps. She lifted her right hand from the blanket, trembling but deliberate, milky yet concentrated. Her eyes opened. She avoided eye contact. She glanced barely past me, maybe past the roof, but toward it. Then she said in a whisper, "Thomas, you came." Her voice was clear and cheerful, but it was dry, almost like air. She then raised her fingers to her lips, gave them a little kiss, extended her hand toward that invisible point in the air, and let out a breath. Just a long, calm breath, no struggle, no gasp. Then she was gone. The telemetry told me without me having to ask. I approached and checked for a pulse. Nothing. Her face softened. No indications of discomfort. Nothing but silence. We have a death ritual. If their eyes are open, we close them. We draw the blanket up to the chest rather than over the face. We smooth the hair. We turn down the lights. We carefully clean. All of that was done by me. I remained with her until Carol returned, coffee in hand, and before I could say anything, her eyes widened. I whispered softly, "She waited for you to go." Carol, already in tears, nodded slowly. I've never enjoyed said farewell in public. The charter's fields for the time of death, absence of pain, and family notification, but no place to note what I observed. No way to explain the expression on her face when she saw someone or something. I was unable to. I decided to let it go. Another quiet death. However, I stayed longer than normal that evening to finish out some papers. Approximately 7:30 p.m., 3:13 on my way. They stripped the bed, clean sheets. There's still no antiseptic smell, only emptiness. The call light was on, though. That didn't make sense. There was no room assigned. Room 313 was displayed on the console. Constant red glow. I entered. There was no one in the bed. On the rail, the call button was unaltered. I restarted the console. I briefly smelled something as I turned to go. Brew coffee and Old Spice. I finally spoke with Regina, the night shift nurse who had taken over after I departed. On a Sunday, after someone passes away, do you ever notice something strange? With caution, I asked. Through her glasses, she gazed at me. 313. I went cold. Yes, Regina reclined. On Saturday, 3:10 a.m. 3 times. The call light went out. I enter. The bed was empty, but the monitor was turned off, unplugged, and beeping briefly as if it were tracking vital signs before going blank. We never discussed it again. I have about 10 years of experience as a nurse. I have traced the final breaths of people whose names I will never forget, comforted their families, and held the hands of the dying. Margaret Delaney, however, did not pass away in fear. She was not alone in dying. She extended her hand into an invisible realm. She also grinned, and I was able to see that. Not because I was particularly noteworthy, but simply because I was present, because sometimes it needs to be witnessed by someone. Should keep in mind, there are times in this work that I will always remember. They muttered, not because they were dramatic or tragic. Something more profound about the meaning of death. Sometimes it's a promise whispered and a kiss to the air. You arrived. The entire sensitive to energy notion was never something I believed in. You know, especially in hospitals. I always assumed that people's claims that a room seemed strange, or that they simply knew someone had passed away, They are the result of their imagination. Death and disease are all around us. Naturally, certain rooms feel heavy, but in my 10 years as a registered nurse, I've discovered that sometimes you have to have faith in things that aren't measurable on a screen. You can call me Erica Dawson. For the majority of my career, I have worked the night shift at Greystone Regional, a mid-sized hospital located in eastern North Carolina. We're more of a catch-all for everything from stroke codes to post-op ortho to psych holds. We're not a major trauma center or anything. You develop your ability to move quickly. Coffee and muscle memory help you survive. Above all, you learn to avoid obsessing over the things that are bothering you at 3 in the morning. Overanalyzing, however, may be the only sensible thing left in that hospital. The radiology room is small. Prep room B is the opposite. You would hardly notice it if you passed it because of its meaningless name. On the inside, however, everything is frigid, tiled, and metal. Hard edges and harsh light. No windows or mirrors. A counter full of vials, barcode scanners, and saline flushes cabinets above. A stainless sink, a small refrigerator below, and other basic utility items. I used to enter mindlessly, get a dose of contrast, set up a line, record the barcodes, and leave after no more than 2 minutes. Then something was different. Not all at once, but a steady, sourceless pressure that made the flesh between my shoulder blades itch if I were being watched. A creeping awareness. I wasn't alone, either. It was during a night shift last winter that I first heard someone bring it up. One of the CT technicians, Lindsay, had returned from getting contrast and was staring off into space. Not frightened, just empty. That room gives me the creeps, she mumbled, massaged her arms as if she were cold, and dropped the vials on the counter. I raised a forehead. Really? She asked, nodding without turning to face me. Have you ever had the impression that someone is standing behind you in there? I asked, laughing. When I'm sleep deprived, I experience the same emotions in the medical room. Not that she laughed back. I didn't take it seriously till then. A few weeks later, at 2:30 a.m., during a sluggish lull, I discussed it with Jamal, a senior imaging technician who had been at Greystone for more than 20 years. Has the contrast room ever caught your attention? He frowned as he looked up. From his crossword puzzle, you mean B? The one next to the clean utility. I grinned. He gave a grunt. Yes, before the most recent renovation, which was about 15 years ago. That was a bathroom. There is a full-length mirror on the rear wall. When they extended imaging, they destroyed it. I went cold. Where the upper cabinets are located, there was a mirror. Removed it and covered it with a patch. Why? I didn't respond, because I had a bad feeling. Something I had not yet figured out. It wasn't a feeling the next time it occurred. Valerie was the one. Val's been my spouse for many years. Hands steady, no nonsense. During a coding, she remains composed and yet recalls your coffee order. She is not a dramatic person. Angio and Val offered to draw up the contrast while we were down in imaging for a CT scan. She was absent, returned for 4 minutes. Her face was pale as she did, just blank, not panicked. Her palm gripped the edge of the hallway counter as she leaned on it. She had trouble focusing her eyes. My hand touched her arm. Are you all right? She said, after giving an overly hasty nod. Eyes were present. I blinked. What? Within the wall. Her voice was hollow as she finally turned to face me. Exactly where the upper cabinets meet the wall. Just glassy, round eyes, just looking. No lids, no whites. I held out for the joke. One did not exist. They didn't, she said. Didn't blink, didn't move, simply observed. Then they vanished. She never again entered that room by herself. I believed she was having hallucinations. Sleep deprivation, possibly a migraine aura, but she vowed to be lucid and that it wasn't her imagination. Later that week, I stood there by myself for 3 minutes and checked the room. Though nothing occurred, I sensed it. That strain, that intolerable knowledge that someone was observing. I sensed it even when I closed my eyes, like breath across your neck, or the invisible heat from a stove. I tapped the wall, opened the cupboards, and ran my palm down the grout line where the drywall and tile meet, firm, just the odd weight of silence, no ducts, no cracks, no two-way glass. Eventually, we filed a report, not precisely the eyes, but enough structural, wiring, and airflow concerns to persuade engineering to expose the space. The facilities manager, Manny, and his staff emerged. They grabbed blueprints, performed infrared scans, and even unlocked a part below the upper cabinets. Sturdy drywall with no gaps and a concrete base behind it. Here's what resonated with me, though. That wall segment was a component of the initial hospital construction, which took place in 1974, when Greystone was a long-term psychiatric hospital, and a completely different establishment. Now, nobody discusses that. Some of the bones are still there despite changes in ownership, branding, and function in the 1990s. Apparently, something else does, too. We weren't alone. To get contrast from the opposite side of the department, an increasing number of employees began making comments, avoiding the room, and taking longer routes. One of the new nurses, Jess, became locked in. The door wasn't broken one night. We looked at the lock and the hinges, but she was unable to open it for 30 seconds. Something felt like it was pushing back, she added. The corridor was deserted. When it opened at last, it had not been touched. Security tape showed her yanking the door with apparent effort. Yet there was nothing beyond her. She was the only one struggling. She left her shift early. I am aware that at 3 in the morning, this sounds like a ghost story we tell. Crash between codes isn't what it is. Not at all. No spectre of wailing is present. No floating white lady. There is nothing to prove. It is more nuanced than that, more subtle. It's in the way that when people talk about the room, they go quiet. The way they unconsciously look at the wall. Even if it's only a 30-second draw, the way they consistently leave the door open. Although I haven't seen the eyes, I swear that, occasionally when I'm in that room, I can feel them peering through the tile, as though someone or something is still there, looking from where the mirror once stood. We no longer enter by ourselves. It's for workflow efficiency, officially. Informally, since you begin to feel the eyes once you know they were there. The worst portion is a tiny tile that is located directly over the sink on the back wall. It appears to be just like the others, but if you touch it carefully, you'll hear a slight hollow underneath. Last week, I had another look at the blueprints. It is not intended for that section of the wall to be hollow. Nobody is eager to open it. I don't think the eyes ever left, so perhaps that's a good idea. They're probably still waiting, and I believe they won't one day be happy to observe. Ultimately, you are affected by the peaceful moments, not the codes, not the frantic CP or under fluorescent lights, nor the sucking of machines that breathe for failing lungs, not the metal smell of blood. That's what you're trained for. What surprises you are the quiet times, the ones in between chores, when the hall is filled with half-laughs, and you are finally able to breathe. Lydia Carson, a 34-year-old CNA, is at Virginia's Lakeside Regional. Nobody wants to work evenings, so I do it. The time between sunset and daybreak when, unless someone is dying in a hospital, everyone forgets that hospitals even exist. I have 11 years of experience in this field, long enough to recognize the scent of death on the horizon, long sufficient to distinguish between genuine perplexity and the patient pretending to be confused in order to have a turkey sandwich at 3 in the morning. Long enough to understand when to say nothing and when to tell someone to shut up. However, I still haven't worked out how to deal with grief, not the type that is yours. Not the type that becomes ingrained in your bones during adolescence and doesn't truly go away. Drew was the name of my oldest brother when he passed away. He was 19. I was 14 years old. He was my first refuge and dearest buddy. That evening, we were meant to see a movie. I believe it was the War of the Worlds. Popcorn was what I wanted. Instead, he suggested Taco Bell. He never got home. Drunken motorist. The casket was immediately closed. No farewells. At his funeral, I remained silent. I also didn't weep. I can still clearly recall that. My aunt, who reared us after our father died, and our mother fled, continued squeezing my hand as if she were trying to make me feel anything. People eventually stopped inquiring about my well-being. I therefore ceased considering it as well. Instead, I turned into the girl who helped others with their suffering. The hospital at Lakeside isn't very large, nor is it rural. We act as a buffer between larger cities and the overflow. The majority of the 7 rooms in our small pediatric section are used for hospice or long-term care. CNAS are occasionally rotated in when staffing is brief. And they needed me that month. Children are unique. They weep more but recover more quickly. Their bodies seek to recover. But you're gutted when they don't. Being numb around them is not an option. Not at all. For large black-eyed aliens, stars with little shoes, planets shaped like cats. He once informed me that after he recovered, he would go to Jupiter, which he described as a huge bouncy ball. I took his vitals the first night. He inquired as to whether I owned any pets. I wrapped the cuff around his slender arm and replied, "No, my apartment isn't big enough." "Mine, too," he said gravely. "I still own a dog, though. He's not seen. Rocket is his name." I grinned. "A rocket. He's amiable." Eli stated matter-of-factly that he bites nasty people. "He likes you, though." It was a difficult month. In 403, we lost a 3-month-old 2 SIDS. In 409, a teenager got twice coated. The floor felt thick all around. Pairs are quieter and have a distinct quality, as if the building itself is holding its breath around them. Around 4:30 in the morning, I was taking Eli's blood pressure. He was strangely motionless. Typically, he would go on about his dreams about cloud cities or stories about space pirates. However, he simply tilted his head and gazed at me that morning. "What's causing your sadness over your brother?" I came to a complete stop. "What were you saying?" As if I was sluggish, he blinked at me. "The person who perished in the car was your brother. Do you miss him?" I chuckled. It came naturally, uncomfortable. "Who said that to you?" He didn't respond. Only the faint glimmer of the nurse's station lights reflecting off the rain could be seen beyond the window. Glass with spots. Eli told me that he wasn't upset because you hadn't said goodbye. I remained motionless. I continued to squeeze the cuff bulb with my hand. "Are you all right?" Mallory, another nurse, called from outside the room. "Yes," I responded. A moment too late. Eli was fiddling with a crayon as though he hadn't spoken when I turned to face him again. I kept it a secret. How was I able to? For that, there is no chart, not a procedure. 20 minutes later, there was just me sitting in the break room with shaky hands over a stale cup of coffee made of styrofoam. It had been years since I had mentioned Drew, not to my 3-year boyfriend, not at work, and not during Thanksgiving. Like a letter you're scared to read. That pain had remained folded deep within of me. And now it had been opened by this young youngster in a hospital bed surrounded by chair tubes and extraterrestrials. The following shifts were hazy. I continued to appear. I kept Eli's words to myself. I didn't want to look insane or frighten him. However, I now observed him in a different way, like as I was unaware that he had access to a room. I was making rounds 2 weeks later. Eli had fallen asleep. The cardiac monitor steadily beeped. I heard a laugh coming from down the halls. I entered 408 to assist in repositioning another child. The TV wasn't the cause. The chuckle was that of a child. The laugh came from the corridor, but it was bright, resonant, and familiar, and nobody was there when I went outside. I stayed up late the following night to assist in covering for the night nurse who had to go home unwell. Around 2 a.m. I walked past Eli's room. He was looking up at the ceiling. Silently, I entered. Troublemaker, hello. Not able to sleep, he grinned. He was back. Who? Your sibling. My throat constricted. Eli, you don't need to be scared to drive, he said, but I'm not allowed to frighten you any longer. In any case, he's always in the rear seat. I stepped back. I had a constricted chest. Can you spot him? Quietly, I asked. Eli gave a nod. He's not always like a ghost. He's more like to a flashlight, soft but bright. Eli took a turn 3 days later. The charge nurse drew me aside because I arrived early. Around 3 a.m., Eli quoted, they brought it's not looking good, but he's back. Still, I went to his room. He was intubated, comatose, and surrounded by tubes. His body was no longer able to perform the tasks that machines could, up until shift change. I sat with him. I also mumbled something I hadn't said in 20 years before I left. I'm sorry, tell him. That I ought to have informed someone earlier. That I ought to have discussed him. Eli might not have heard me. I believe that he did. 2 nights later, he passed away. That morning, I let down the windows on my way home. It was too cold for windows to be open. I didn't mind, though. I swear I heard his chuckle only once, at the red light at the old bakery, where Drew and I used to go. Not loud, not eerie, but mine. Unquestionably his. I didn't check the rear seat. I didn't must. I still don't discuss it much. However, occasionally I sense something else in the room, whether I'm brushing the hair of a child burn victim in room 206 or holding the hand of someone's mother in room 512. Nor sadness, nor fear, simply present, like an incandescent flashlight. I also don't feel alone as I drive home in silence and exhaustion. No more. Not since Eli. I hadn't heard those words from a 6-year-old child in a hospital room that morning, when I didn't realize I needed to hear them. He's all right now. I didn't think premonitions existed, not in a paranormal way. In any case, those who work in the medical field are naturally skeptical. There is too much pain, blood, and reality to engage in mysticism or ghost stories. I've worked in emergency rooms for more than 10 years. Witnessed events that would shatter most individuals, suicides, overdoses, accidents, and inexplicable fatalities. But I wasn't haunted by any of it the way he was. I was working at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday in late January. Until 3 in the morning, shift at Red Pines Regional Hospital, a modest 2-story facility with 6 emergency rooms and a walk-in clinic close to the town's outskirts. We weren't a facility for trauma. We stabilized and moved in case something went wrong. However, most evenings were quiet, flu, sprains, or even a fender bender. It had been a typical day, quite quiet. I was actually drinking lukewarm coffee. At 8:17 p.m., the nurses' stations, when the triage board displayed his name, James Lewood, 84, walk-in. According to the chief complaints, he will pass away tomorrow. That was my first thought. Perhaps loneliness, perhaps early dementia. It occurs. Even though they may not know how to ask. Elderly patients occasionally simply crave company. However, I felt uneasy about the wording. He feels as though he's dying. He just states that he will die tomorrow. He does not wish to die. I proceeded to the waiting area. The TV was muted, and he was seated by himself on the far left chair, just a heavy flannel shirt tucked into corduroys, no coat. He folded his hands on his lap. His eyes were sharp, his stance straight. He seems calm. I yelled his name. He didn't hold off until I was done. He said, "You're the one I was supposed to speak with," and got to his feet on his own. "Okay," I replied, smiling cautiously. "Exam room 3. Well, come on back. We'll get you checked out." I started by taking his vitals. It's standard. Temperature 98, BP 12,274, pulse 7,602, and SUT 98% on room air. 6. There are no symptoms of distress or pain complaints, and breathing is normal and effortless. His skin had a nice tint and was warm. Clear eyes, bilaterally clear lungs, regular heart tones, no rubs, no murmurs, and no gait problems. After all, he had entered alone. Mr. Elwood, what has brought you in tonight? I inquired. After a moment of silence, he spoke. This morning, I dreamed. I noticed that I was still. This shirt was on me. He lightly touched the flannel. I realized it wasn't a dream when the clock showed 4:44. It will occur at that time. Tomorrow, I said softly. Something like that can feel real. However, dreams are typically not accurate forecasts. Have you experienced headaches, dizziness, or chest pressure? Not at all. Although I feel good, I've never been so certain of something. I was meant to leave at that point. Naturally, I documented everything, no matter how odd. He showed no symptoms of a stroke, disorientation, or slurred speech. Additionally, he aced the normal mental state questions I asked him on orientation, memory, and attention. Why did you choose to enter? I inquired. He looked me in the eyes and said, I didn't want to be alone when it happened. I was hoping to see someone who would pay attention. Dr. Ledge, the attending on duty that evening, was a composed, compassionate doctor who hardly ever dismissed anything outright. She perused my. All right, let's run the full workup, she said, raising her eyebrows slightly before continuing. We did everything, CBC and CMP, normal EKG, perfect sinus rhythm, troponins, undetectable chest X-ray, clear UA, normal blood glucose, 97, no fever, no infection markers, no neurodeficits, no history of cardiac events, no diabetes, no hypertension, no falls, and no confusion. He wasn't taking any medications other than a daily baby aspirin. By all measured measures, his body was in good condition, so we kept him for observation. He ate a turkey sandwich and drank black coffee at about 11:30 p.m. And he remained silent, staring out the small window that faced the parking lot. Eventually, I inquired, do you have family nearby? We could give them a call. They wouldn't comprehend, he said, shaking his head. I've already tried. He grinned after glancing down at his hands, gently. However, you've shown kindness, and I appreciate that. Dr. Liu and I spoke at 12:55 a.m. There is no medically valid explanation. He's not suicidal. He's not crazy. He's simply certain. I walked in to dismiss him. I understand, he said, standing as I gave him the paperwork. You have rules, she replied. No psychiatric indicators either. I hope you'll be working tomorrow, but if not, thank you. I wasn't scheduled for the following day, but a few hours before my regular shift time, I received a call from Michelle, another nurse on our floor. I'll be all right. He shook my hand, firm grip, warm skin, and held it just a second, longer than expected. I paused, then remembered his face. Yeah, I responded. I'll take it. She was rushing to find coverage since her child had a fever. The 24th of January, 4:31 p.m. Sarah, the front desk clerk, waved me down as we returned via the emergency room entrance. EMS was on their way. An elderly guy experiencing cardiac arrest collapsed at the bus stop outside the post office. I was escorting a young woman down to imaging for a potential case of appendicitis. The monitor read a systole, and I quickly recognized James Wood, eyes closed, face pale, chest jumping under the strain of CPR, no pulse, no respirations. He came at 4:43, and I felt my throat constrict. They rolled in the gurney, compressions, already underway. When Dr. Liu returned, she started administering epinephrine right away, and we worked him for 5 minutes before 10. I bagged while Brian took over compressions. The second hand clicked into place, and I peered up at the clock. Nothing, no rhythm, pupils fixed and dilated. No response to medication, no shock suggested. At 4:44 p.m., Dr. Liu remarked quietly, "Time of death, 16:44, after a little period of silence. He was transported to the small morgue beyond radiology, and we quietly cleaned the room. She put sudden cardiac arrest, unspecified, but I didn't believe it under cause of death on the death form that Dr. Lej and I filled out. Number me, no stroke symptoms, and no arrhythmia. He was still upright. No trauma occurred. Nothing had been brewing beneath the surface in his laboratory the previous evening. He simply knew. I stayed motionless in the staff lounge after they took him away, still wearing my gloves. He didn't panic. He didn't try to stop it. And he just begged not to be alone, I thought. I considered his shirt. He spoke about it as if it were important. He said, "You're the one I was supposed to speak with. We treat death like an enemy in the emergency room. We inject it with medications, shock it, and tube it. Because it's our responsibility. We pull it back from the edge." James Wood, however, did not object. As though he had made peace long before it came to him, he handled it with wisdom and elegance. I remembered how his hands felt in mine as I glanced down at them, real, warm, and steady. That's the kind of patience you never forget, because of what they knew before everyone else did, not because of what you did for them. Additionally, they decided to tell you somehow. Being a nurse was never my dream job. That's the reality. I always imagined myself to be an artist since I like stillness and charcoal while growing up in Coos Bay, a small, rainy town on the Oregon coast. However, life has a humorous way of putting you in charge before you're prepared. When I was 17, my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I thought nurses were the strongest people in the world, as I spent nights in hospitals staring at ceiling tiles and listening to their whispered conversations. I applied to nursing school when she died away, primarily as a way to cope with my loss and find stability. 23 years have passed since then. I am currently 39 years old, and 16 of those years were spent working in the emergency room at St. Mercy Medical Center. St. Mercy is not a major trauma center. Although there aren't many reporters or cameras here, we certainly see our fair share of overdoses, auto accidents, psychological holds, falls in the elderly, and occasionally anything more. It's not something you learn to chart. It was mid-shift on a Thursday, just now. The lunch rush had subsided. You know that period of time when everything seems strangely quiet, like if the hospital is holding its breath. And we were there, charting, was being caught up by the nurses. I was in the middle of evaluating a child who had a sprained ankle when the overhead call came in, and our charge nurse, Linda, was at the whiteboard transferring assignments. Room 7, code blue, blue code. There's not sound a lot like that. It penetrates everything, including dialogue. We moved automatically, fluidly, and as if we were attracted. I ran after giving the ankle child to another nurse. Man in his late 60s, room 7. Frank Mercer's condition following myocardial infarction had been he was moved from the intensive care unit that morning for telemetry monitoring, they said. But no one is ever truly stable here. According to his chart, he had coded once that morning, with a brief downtime, followed by a spontaneous return of circulation. 2 minutes later, his DNR status was complete, and he was on the monitor when I arrived. His vitals were already intubated, with his heart rate dropping to 32. He was being backed by respiratory treatment. Dr. Carrie Nolan, already gloved up, said, "Push, epi," in a forceful but composed tone. She had only been at St. Mercy for a year, but she was reliable, one of those people who never flinched. I assumed control of the airway, I said. I have a bag valve. The bedside was struck by the crash cart. As it always does, a sound that always seems personal in some way. The defib pads were in place. The screen was flat. One of our technicians, Luis stated, "We're starting compressions." We synchronized our movements. 1 milligram, there is epinephrine aboard, I yelled. It's funny how mechanical CPR gets, so keep doing it. It's possible to sound like you're reading directions from a cereal box while coding someone's brother, father, or spouse. It's not that we don't give a damn. The reason is that, if you allow the emotion to enter, you'll drown in it, even for a brief moment. Compressions, rhythm checks, and medication rounds. It's still a systole, Nolan mumbled, looking at the screen. No rhythm, that is shocking. Sweat was streaming down my back by minute 12. I continued to bag and count, in silence. On compressions, Luis rotated out. Someone said, "Another amp of epi." I heard Linda murmur close to my ear at minute 16. "We've already completed 4 rounds. I gave a nod. Nothing has changed. 20 minutes. The voice of Dr. Nolan grew softer. "We'll call it in 2 more minutes, if nothing changes." Everyone understood what that meant. Jaime, one of our more recent nurses, drew my attention. She furrowed her brows. "Is it still worthwhile?" Her expression inquired. I continued to bag. It happened at that moment. Not a rapid surge, not a buzzer, not a shift in rhythm. The screen remained flat. He barely opened his eyes, but I could see it. I initially believed it to be a simple post-mortem response. Sometimes it does. Traces of electricity. The muscles twitch. Then he let out a gasp. A guttural, full, deep breath. I went cold. I held the bag valve for a moment. I couldn't raise my voice, so I said, "Doctor." "He's simply vitals." Nolan intervened with a snap. We hurried, putting the pulse ox on his finger and reattaching the blood pressure cuff. The screen chirped, there, but not loud. 38 is the sinus bradycardia. Heart rate. "He's back," declared someone. When I heard it, I was still leaning over him. A murmur. The words were obvious, yet his lips hardly moved. I'd already left. Such a sentence is not something you forget. Not from a man who hadn't had a heartbeat for more than 20 minutes. He was sedated, stabilized, the vent settings were changed, and the ICU was informed, but nobody said anything, not in reference to his words, not immediately. Luis was the first to mention it later, in the worker lounge. "Did you all hear that?" Nobody responded. Jaime averted her gaze. I gazed at my sneakers while sipping cold coffee, unresponsive and intubated. Frank Mercer spent 6 days in the intensive care unit. Then we received a notice one morning. He was cognizant, feeble, and awake, breathing on his own, extated. I didn't go see him until right before he was discharged. I had no idea why. Perhaps I needed to find closure. Pale and sitting upright, he was using a plastic spoon to eat lime jello. My gentle question was, "Mr. Mercer?" Weary but concentrated, his eyes met mine. "Are you someone I know?" "During the code, I was with you." "Oh," he blinked slowly. "That occurred." I gave a nod. "You had left. However, you later returned." He took a deep swallow. "I recall floating." That's what I'd say, afloat. It was neither dark nor bright, simply no. Longer, hefty, then you, with your face directly above mine. I paused. "Remember anything you said?" He gave a head shake. "Why that number?" I said, "Nothing," attempting to smile. "I wanted to see how you were doing." I felt as though I hadn't inhaled deeply in days when I walked out of the room. That day, I charted everything. Each and every vital sign, medication, precise compression time, and RASC. Not the whisper, though, such phenomena cannot be charted. Nevertheless, I've been thinking about it daily ever since. Some of us use an unofficial phrase. It's known as the silent code. It isn't the dramatic ones with loud monitors and yelling families. It's the ones where everything seems to be in a state of suspension, as if the laws of medicine were slightly bent, allowing something to enter or exit. Frank Mercer made it out alive. 2 months after being released from the hospital, he moved in with his daughter in Eugene and sent us a card along with a package of pastries. But the weight of that whisper is still in my memory. I had already left, perhaps he was, and perhaps there was a reason he returned. I'm not sure. In this field, we don't obtain answers. Only a few seconds, like sterile fog, questions linger in the air, but that's why I continue to appearing for every code and every shift. Because sometimes things don't end when they seem to. Death isn't always the most terrifying aspect. It is what lies just over it, and the repercussions. I was late to nursing, 27-year-old night school student, single mother, with a wobbly automobile and an even more unsteady sense of balance. I put a lot of effort into becoming a licensed practical nurse LPN and later an RN. I also worked extra shifts when my child was with my sister, although I wasn't precisely inexperienced. I wasn't green either by the time I started working evenings on the medical floor at Riverside Valley Regional, not because it was crazy or full of codes, but because I recall the night this occurred. No, it wasn't. Everything seemed regular, so it was the kind of shift that gets under your skin. It's always the worst. It began like any other night. Med passes, turning schedules, and chart changes. I had individuals in rooms 204 to 209. There were a few perplexed elderly people, mixed bag post-ops, and a long-term placement who was basically palliative. Late January was the time. Gloomy, damp, and cold. It's the kind of night that hurts your bones before you've even gotten to work. There was a profound silence in the hospital, the kind that descends after 3 in the morning, when the hallways begin to feel too large and the final agitated patient falls asleep. Mr. Lang and I were in room 207, taking vital signs. He was getting better from a bowel resection and was at last controlling the broth. We talked for a while. I enjoyed his dark, sarcastic sense of humor. With a conspiratorial look on his face, he remarked, "I think they're sneaking salt into this broth." I grinned. "You believe that to be a crime?" With a wink, he muttered, "I believe it's blessed mercy." After giving him his pain medication and laughing, I turned down the lights. I walked into the corridor, looked down to the distant fire exit, and stopped. "Try and rest, Mr. Lang. You're doing good." We didn't see the familiar footprints of nurses hurrying in danskos or sticky socks. These were muddy, barefoot, and lined up in a precise line, beginning at the fire exit at the end of the hall, left, right, left, all the way to room 208's threshold. Miss Jeanette Morris, 84, was located in room 208. I called down to my CNA. Hey, the non-verbal post-massive CVATRA was in place. No visitor's full code was on paper, but practically palliative. No movement since her arrival. We repositioned her, managed her feed, and monitored vitals. At the nurse's station, she was recording us, and she raised her head. "Yes, take a look at this." She gave me a pat and froze next to me, her eyes widening. "Who in the world is going about barefoot?" I whispered. I had no idea. "The fire exits are locked. A code would be required." Together, we followed the prints. They came to an exact stop at the entrance to 208. No prints leading away, no rotating, no dragging. As though someone entered and never left. Slowly, Lisa opened the door. Both of us peeked in. Ms. Morris was exactly as she had been at 2 in the morning, silent, faint, almost perceptible. "Do you want me to look at the cameras?" Lisa inquired, seeming uneasy. I whispered, "No cams down here." "Budget cuts." Lisa shook her head and said, "Just check with security. Maybe someone came through during shift change. The door is ajar." We would have heard it if it had opened. She was not mistaken. If the fire exit was unarmed, it was wired to scream. There was nothing more I said. I just took a picture with my phone. I knew what was going to happen, so it was just for me. not for the chart or a report. By 7:15 a.m., the prints had vanished, not faded, not smudged, not gone, tile is spotless. There are no mop lines or water stains. I waited for Tony, the janitor who works the early shift, to arrive with his cart. "This hallway was cleaned this morning, right?" I inquired. I asked him about aliens, and he looked at me like that. "No, I began taking Pez today. I have yet to touch this floor." "Why, nothing. I was just wondering." I refrained from pushing it, kept it a secret throughout the huddle. The sound would have been insane. I could already picture the reticent nods, the courteous dismissals, and the brief quips during the break. Later in the room, 3 days later, Ms. Morris died gently and sweetly. The heart rate decreased and then stopped. Just a soft beep and a flat line on the screen, no code, no help. After that, I assisted with room prep, gathered her possessions, cleaned the bed, and left the area close to her doorway immaculate. But those footprints, the way they stopped at her door as if someone had come for her, someone she knew, someone she didn't have to go with because she wasn't returning, were all I could think about. That was not the only occasion that occurred. I was floated to oncology 3 months later. I was in and out of lucidity with Mr. Chambers, a terminal patient, in his early 60s. He was more awake than normal that night. He questioned me abruptly. "Can you hear him?" I stopped mid-chart. "Hear who?" His eyes were dreamy as he gazed at the ceiling. I told myself it was the medication. The man in the hallway, bare feet. He says it's not time yet. However, I swear I saw a single wet footprint on the tile when I left his room. Only one. It was gone by daybreak. 6 nights later, Mr. Chambers passed away. I don't typically share these experiences because I don't need anyone to believe me. Not because I'm afraid of being laughed at. I'm not lying. If you worked through the night shifts long enough, real evenings, when the air feels thicker and the silence hums, you begin to notice things. It is not the light that is flickering at the end of the hall. It's the pressure in a slightly too still room. We occasionally witness grief. Peace is sometimes visible. Occasionally, we catch sight of things have no place in a report. Items you carry in silence. That picture of the footprints is still with me. I never offer to display it, and no one ever asks why. Because you don't have to explain everything in nursing. You simply have to observe. I never imagined that I would always remember her. People come and go from this area of work. Some are slow, some are swift. However, some of them remain with you, not only in recollection, but also in the burden they leave behind. It occurred 3 years into my CNA employment. Though I'm old enough to understand that not all deaths are battles, I'm yet young enough to still cringe when I see death. The setting for this narrative was St. Hazelwood General, a medium-sized hospital in northern Wisconsin that is sandwiched between 2 small communities. Long-term patients, new post-ops, and a few hospice rooms were all mixed together. I was a night shift worker, 12 chambers and a few hands in a dimly lit, silent hallway on the telemetry floor. A place where the sound of the clocks is more audible at 3 in the morning, compared to noon. Before you understand a storm is approaching, that night seemed normal. There was a quiet hum. The patients are being protected from falls. One post-stroke patient kept removing her fall. A man who had undergone a heart bypass in room 316 said that the staff were taking his footwear, as usual, following. That was Ms. Eloise, room 308, Harper, 74. Congestive heart failure at the end stage. Avoid performing resuscitation a week prior. The family had signed all the documents. Only a nasal cannula, no oxygen mask, silver hair, carefully combed, and pale skin stretched over bone her niece, who had come to visit earlier that day. Every morning, Eloise was unique, not perplexed or upset. Unlike most hospice patients, she did not require pain medication every 4 hours. She was awake, watchful, Aware, I was in the 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. change. The faint scent of cafeteria coffee and hand sanitizer was still present on my badge. Just around 9:30 p.m. when I completed my initial round. It was 3:08 when I carefully opened the door. She was awake and looking at the little, muted flat screen TV that was fastened to the wall. A silent ancient black and white film was playing. I said, "Hi, Miss Harper," in a quiet voice. Despite the hollowness in her cheeks, she turned her head and asked, "How are you feeling?" Her eyes were piercing. By 3:45, I'll be gone. Just that, no grin, no hello. I blinked. Apologies. 3:45, she said again. Be at ease as usual. I'll pass away at that time. I was awkwardly standing there, not knowing if she was presenting a fact or if she was confused. Why at 3:45? I asked, being careful not to come across as condescending. That's simply the moment. I always knew that day would come. She didn't seem dramatic, unlike patients who yell about angels or scream that they're being pulled beneath them. She seemed to be informing me of the arrival time of her Amazon item. I took a swallow. "Would you like some water?" She gave a nod. I repositioned her blanket and gave her a plastic cup with a straw. She remained silent. I did not address her comment, but I did make a notation in her chart. Ox 3 is resting and has just been marked a no worrying. However, I couldn't get rid of it. The night continued as it had. In 312 I assisted in cleaning up a code brown. During vitals, I was shadowed by a young nurse named Rena, who had just graduated from school. In 316, the elderly man attempted to urinate in his shoe. We chuckled softly, the manner you do when your body is overstimulated with caffeine and sleep deprivation. By 2:40 a.m. there was silence on the floor. I charted on the old computer at the nurse's station using a keyboard that was stuck on the letter T. Then something strange occurred. 3:12 a.m. I glanced at the timepiece. I didn't intend to. My eyes were simply drawn. The stop sign like red digital illumination above the med. 312. For several seconds, I remained motionless. In a moment, I stood back. I informed Rena. I went to 308 on foot. The air felt strange for some reason. I had enough experience to recognize when a setting wasn't right. The first thing I noticed when I opened the door was the silence. The film was not good. Her blanket was softly shadowed by the nightlight. She had her eyes shut. Her hands were neatly crossed over her chest. Additionally, the monitor flatlined as soon as I intervened. There was only a straight path, no prior notice, no sirens, and no struggle. With a racing heart, I stood there. Behind me, the night nurse entered. She felt for a pulse. Nothing. Death time. 3:45 a.m. We called the family and informed the supervisor in accordance with protocol. While we waited for transportation, I remained and sat with her body. She seems calm. People don't use this word carelessly. But she did in this field, like someone who waited, not someone who had drifted away. I attempted to compose my note back at the station, but I kept typing and deleting. PT was discovered to be unresponsive. As per the DNR, the monitor displayed ACY with no resuscitation. Initiated. The moment of at 3:45, death called. It was clinical, clean, and simple, yet none of it conveyed the knowledge. The following day, I discussed it with Rena. She inquired as to the precise hour. Yes, Rena appeared nervous. Do you believe that people are aware of when it's their time? I gave a shrug. Not all of them, but I believe that some do. Other patients have told me odd things over the years. Others converse with folks I can't see. Before leaving, some people grin. Some remain terrified till the very end. She wasn't scared, though, Ms. Eloise Harper. She was not perplexed. She was prepared. At a training seminar, I once shared this story. After then, the atmosphere was a little quieter. However, since we encounter a variety of endings In our line of work, I usually keep it to myself. Loud, sad, protracted, and aggressive. However, there are also calm ones. They also reverberate. I now pay attention when a patient says something that sounds like farewell. I pay attention because there are some patients who are more knowledgeable than the laboratories, the machines, or us. Additionally, they whisper it rather than yell it. The 12-hour hours, paperwork, and blood aren't the most difficult aspects of this profession. It's the way some people enter your life, even for a short time, and stay there forever. Among them was Harper. Even today, at 3:45 a.m., I go past a room. When I think of her, I question how many of us are truly paying attention and who else knows. I have enough experience working in surgery to recognize when a room is odd, not in a conspicuous or noisy manner. A halt in the beat, a moment too long before the music resumes, a feeling in the pit of your stomach, no slamming doors, no murmuring voices, not even a flicker in the lights. Rachel Mendes is my name. At Briar Hill Medical Center, a mid-sized hospital nestled on the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina, I work as a certified scrub nurse. Carolina, since I graduated from nursing school at the age of 24, I've been employed on the surgical floor. I've witnessed things go right, wrong, sideways, and so far south that they hardly returned. I'm currently 36 years old. However, I still don't have a solid explanation for the 6-week period in October of last year when something happened in 03. The surgery department at Briar Hill, quite close-knit. The typical cycle of residents, a few serious attendings, and nurses who have been there long enough to recognize and issue 3 steps before it arises are all present. Our operating system isn't that sophisticated. No matter how many layers you wear under your scrubs, the 5 major rooms, which have a standard layout, are always frigid. That month, I was teamed with Dr. Isaiah Nolan, a general practitioner who is shrewd, but laid back, surgeon. He was quick to laugh, but he took surgical counts seriously. Sheila Tran, who was in her 50s, was our circulator, Vietnamese nurse, from the past, who never missed a beat. The core crew remained largely the same, although the technicians changed. The instance involved a simple repair of a ventral hernia, nothing noteworthy, typical. That month alone, we'd completed a dozen. It was a typical morning. Everything went well with prep. I used muscle memory to lay out the Mayo stand. Army-Navy retractors, Kellys, Alice's, Metson bomb scissors, number 15 scalpel, and needle drivers. We recorded everything and conducted the count again. I always made sure that Dr. Nolan's instruments followed his rhythm and that they were symmetrical, with the scalpel always at the 12 o'clock position. However, something minor altered in the middle of the process. I grabbed the Met scissors and cut a small piece of fascia. My fingers found nothing. I was stopped by that. There they were. That's where I put them. I looked up. "Have you moved my mats, Sheila?" From the chart, she raised her gaze. "I haven't come into contact with your stand." I looked at the rear table, not present, peered beneath the curtain. Nothing. Even took a quick look at the immaculate floor. Dr. Nolan hesitated a second. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I said slowly. "I got a pair of scissors lost." "Continue." We adjusted. Used a different pair. The case proceeded smoothly. There are no delays. I discovered the missing Mets during turnover 20 minutes later. The gurney was in charge of them, uncontaminated, sterile, and clean. Sheila stated it was likely dropped during setup. However, her statements were not in line with her tone. She also didn't think it was true. We were overly cautious and accustomed to spotting that type of thing. Nevertheless, we dismissed it. Long hours, small error. It occurs until it occurs once more. 2 weeks later, it was a Friday afternoon. A patient with persistent diverticulitis had their sigmoid removed. I grabbed the Richardson retractor. I had prepared on the right side of my mayo, the middle of the container. Lost. I knew I hadn't moved it this time, had left it alone since draping. My eyes darted over my field as I froze. Richardson is missing, I muttered. A bleeder was being sutured by Dr. Nolan. Are you certain? Sheila had already begun to inspect the rear table. She claimed that it was present during setup. I checked. Moving forward, we changed a daver, made adjustments, and managed to make it work. During cleanup, the Richardson appeared stuck behind the boy machine's foot pedal, bloodless, touchless, and clean. 30 minutes after clocking out that evening, I sat in the locker room and stared at nothing. For 12 years, I would run counts. I had never once misplaced an instrument. It had now occurred twice in the last 2 weeks. For ourselves, we began to keep a side log. Notes in a small spiral notebook Sheila kept in her locker. Nothing formal. 10/3 the missing scissors were discovered in the mid-case beneath gurneys. Post-op, behind the foot pedal, is the missing mid-smoid for the 1016 Richardson retractor. The pattern was consistent, each case, one instrument. The Mayo stand always has something to offer, always came back in a day or two. Never tainted, never used blood. I began to prepare twice. Updated the back table with backups, like I was getting ready for the Olympics. I counted my trays. It was ineffective. A skin hook followed by a theft and a pair of curved Mayo scissors. I was having trouble sleeping by the time we got to the 5th occurrence. One night I stayed up late. Intestinal obstruction that had taken longer than anticipated had been resolved. All three were silent, the lights were low, and Sheila and I were the only ones folding the draperies and getting ready to sterilize. I grabbed my stethoscope and hung it on the hanger near the Pyxis cabinet. It wasn't there, but I always did it before going to the locker room. Sheila, I murmured in a weak voice, have you moved my scope? She glanced up without touching it. I looked all over, my purse, the break room, and even the linen bean in case I accidentally dropped it into a sheet. 30 minutes later, we discovered it hanging properly coiled on the side handle of the anesthesia trolley. The O was empty of other people, I promise. I didn't. I got begun. I couldn't get rid of it, but Sheila simply stared at me and said, the room remembers Rachel. Maybe it puts things back where they've been before. Tools weren't the end of it. When I arrived early one morning for pre-op prep, I discovered that the O3 door was unlocked and the lights were already on. The suction was sprinting. The room had been left empty for the night. No one had entered, according to maintenance. Another post-op patient claimed that when she was waking up, she noticed a humming noise in the room. Male voice, she said. A gentle old song seemed depressing. In recovery, nobody was scrubbed. In the room, we didn't play any music. A vascular transplant was the tipping point. The needle driver disappeared from the field in the middle of the procedure. I put it down as soon as it was in my hand and averted my gaze for 2 seconds. It had vanished. Not indignant, but worried, Dr. Nolan became pale. We must now locate that. A surgical emergency, he explained, is a lost needle driver. It can indicate that the patient was left with it. A significant, instantaneous images, records, and litigation. However, 30 seconds later, we discovered it sitting upright on the rear table's instrument tray, as if it had been placed there by someone. At last, we informed the administration. They watched the video. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Static pictures of the trays were displayed in the frames from the missing tool timestamps. Then the tool reappeared. Nobody came over. Just there, with no hand in sight. Security looked for signs of tampering in the feeds. It swept. No indications of corruption. The hardware was spotless. Although they were unable to explain the timing, they blamed it on software bugs, synchronized with the absent instruments at all times. They then discreetly removed us from O3 for a week. They called it preventative maintenance. It was all illogical. During a double shift one night, I was once more by myself in operating room 3. After someone called in ill, I volunteered for 2 cases in a row. The room was prepared, quiet, and ready. I merely stared at the Mayo stand while wearing my gown and gloves. Without anticipating a response, I muttered, "Where are you putting them?" Then I heard a sound, a clink. Not loud or aggressive, just near the wall where we kept extra suction tubing. There was metal tapping. I didn't breathe or move. Then I noticed it when I turned. There's a single curved clamp neatly beside the bean. Perfect, spotless, positioned, not tossed or dumped, positioned. It was not picked up by me. I informed the team that we were switching to O1 because of temperature concerns, backed out of the room, and waited in the hallway. Nobody questioned it. After November, the incident decreased. The odd disappearances completely halted by the middle of December. A cause was never discovered. No staff tampering, no rodent activity, no ventilation problems, and nothing in the wiring. For a month, we discreetly and unofficially ceased using O3. After a while, Dr. Nolan moved to a bigger trauma facility. In April, Sheila retired. I still scrub in and work here, but I try to stay out of that room. I know what it was like to work in an environment that didn't feel empty, not because I'm scared. A room something seemed to be present, not irate or aggressive, but observing and waiting. Jessica, a recent graduate of surgical tech school, asked me a few months ago if I had ever misplaced a tool while working on a case. Never permanently, I responded with a smile, and she chuckled. It's strangely particular. I didn't elaborate. There are some topics you simply avoid discussing. You know deep down that if they did, it might imply they've been through it too. Not because you're frightened, no one will believe you. Perhaps each O has an own rhythm and memory. And perhaps, just possibly, the room occasionally moves slightly to remind us that we never have complete control. Not even with the sharpest scalpel in your hand, not in life, nor in surgery. In the past, I didn't think indicators existed. Working in healthcare for 24 years transforms you. You become proficient in compartmentalization. It's a septic patient. Polyotative is where that one is. It is necessary to turn room 312. All night long, room 309 has not urinated. To bear the emotional burden, you disintegrate yourself into clinical fragments. At age 21, I began working as a CNA. I currently work as a registered nurse and am responsible for most nights on the east wing of St. Dora's Extended Care Facility, which is a large, interconnected hospice and long-term care facility nestled amid cornfields. A strip mall in Cedar Hill, Indiana, that is decaying. We are among the few 24-hour facilities that have high-acuity residents who are too ill to be admitted to the hospital, but too frail for home care, as well as hospice overflow. Most nights are silent there. We keep the televisions turned down and the overhead lights dim. After 9 p.m., even the janitors speak quietly. That's the reason the sound is so odd. This isn't a hallucination. It's a bell narrative. Not a dropped metal tray. Not a blaring monitor. A quiet, gentle, antique bell that is as genuine as the codes that come after it. I was 34 years old and working nights on the hospice side when I first heard it. We were still on edge after losing a double room above due to a respiratory outbreak. Masks on, ice fatigued, enduring the gradual trickle of paperwork and sorrow. At around 3:10 a.m., mid-January, I recall this because Joe, the maintenance man, was cursing in the basement while attempting to defrost the frozen outdoor pipes that evening. I was making my way to room 218 with my vitals cart. Mr. Levitt, who is COPD in the middle stages of illness, stopped to look in the linen cupboard. I heard it at that point. Ding ding. Not mechanical, not loud, not overhead paging, not a cool light. It sounded like a cord being softly pulled from a different room. similar to the type of bell you may see in a Victorian setting, intentional, courteous, yet totally inappropriate. On a brand new blanket, I froze one hand. There was nobody in the hallway. With their typical weary hum, the overhead lights buzzed. There are no local help, alarms, or communications. I waited. Nothing. I dismissed it and went into 218. Mr. Levitt was drowsy, pallid, and breathing shallowly. O2 was 85%, but that was his starting point. I listened to his wet lungs for a moment, but no worse than it had been before, and raised the blankets. His pulse ox flatlined 9 minutes later. We dialed the code. The hospice physician arrived, verified the time of death, and offered consolation to the family. Except for that bell, it was quiet, respectful, and textbook at first. I didn't bring it up. I don't have any superstitions. However, 2 months later, it occurred once more, this time prior to Ms. Darnell coding in 103, and once more prior to Mr. Chi in 309. I began to listen. Always faint, always close by, and always only minutes away from losing someone. We didn't anticipate losing that shift. I informed one of our assistants, Marcy. She had been here almost as long as I had, and she had witnessed everything from strokes to a patient who used a concealed lighter to burn his blankets. She stirred her instant coffee and said, "Bell, like a cool light. No, like a bell from the past. Like someone in another room tugging a rope." After blinking, Marcy nodded slowly. "You also heard it. Not every fatality occurred. It was peculiar because of that. Prior to scheduled passings, it didn't ring." We sat with hospice cases as they passed away. The ones with ADN are laminated on the door and 3 separate comfort medication orders on their records. No, the bell rang before the ones that were expected. Those who left before breakfast but remained stable at midnight, it seemed to know. According to Marcy, a nurse she had worked with in '98 used the same term, which she termed the servant's bell. We had 3 consecutive admissions from the county hospital one night in the early spring. On paper, all of the older overflow scenarios appeared to be stable. When I heard this, I was already 3 hours behind on my medical pass. Once more, ding, ding, from the hallway behind me. This time, with my heart pounding, I quickly turned in the hopes of seeing someone. However, it was deserted. Only a flickering exit sign at the far end and the vending machine. It was silent in room 215. The new man in room 216, Mr. Halverson, 82, had a post-op hip replacement and was awaiting clearance from rehab. Earlier, he and his daughter had been giggling and discussing returning to woodworking. At 2:43 a.m., he coded. He stopped breathing in the middle of telling me about the bookshelf he was going to build. Yet there was no discomfort or arrhythmia. "I am massive," the doctor remarked, severing his gloves. However, I was already aware the bell had been heard by me. Something else is involved. Something I kept as a secret. I occasionally hear it even when no one is nearby. There are no codes, no patients in adjacent rooms, and nothing is wrong with the health. Then another thing occurs, like the evening I heard it outside of room 107, which we had cleared out for thorough cleaning following a C. diff case. No equipment, no patients. Ding, ding. I entered. They stripped the bed. There were no lights on. I listened while standing motionless. Annie, our front desk receptionist, suffered a heart arrest that evening. She had no past and was 37. It was a fluke, a concealed valve problem. According to the EMT, she almost made it out alive. Additionally, I had heard the bell precisely 10 minutes prior to her collapse. It turned into a pattern that was impossible, brutal, and sacred. It would occasionally chime, soft, clear, and real when I was in the break room making soup or looking over patient records, and I would have to hurry around making rounds and checking up on each and every patient I could. "You don't have long. Make this moment count. Clara was the first person I trusted enough to ask directly, and I felt a sense of reverence rather than fear. Our weekend RM was she, with silver hair that was constantly in a bun and a voice that could instantly silence a whole nursing home staff. She was a quiet, austere woman. On a Saturday at 3:30 a.m., I said, "Have you ever heard something before a code?" At first, she merely stared at me with those wise, weary eyes without responding. Then she gave one nod. "The bell," she murmured. I really did try to keep track of everything, and I even maintained a little notebook in my scrub pocket that I used to write down the date, time, and location, but there was no tangible explanation. I checked. Joe scratched his beard and muttered, "Everything's fine. You sure you're not just hearing things?" "No, Joe, I'm not." I started feeling it, too. Vents, light fixtures, trolleys, even asked maintenance to inspect our call system wiring. The incident occurred in the new West Wing, a part we rarely used and only reopened due to flu season overflow. Just 2 hours into my shift last month, Derek Platt, 56, who has early onset ALS, was there, and his wife came every evening. It was like the world inhaled just before exhaling for the last time. I was refilling gloves when the sound came, ding, ding, right outside his door. I froze, checked his chart, and everything was normal. He wasn't even close to the end. His breathing was aided, but steady, and his intellect was intact. He even made snarky remarks about the cuisine in our cafeteria. I strolled in, still hours, away from my next medication, and he grinned and said, "Hey, you, are you okay? You appear to have seen a ghost." He asked me if I thought he would attend his daughter's wedding next spring, and I answered that I did. I stayed with him longer than normal, and he passed away from a pulmonary embolism 23 minutes later. I don't try to explain it anymore. I don't inform the new hires. It's not something you teach in orientation. If they hear it, they'll know. It was fast, unpredictable, and, once again, the bell had known. I've learned not to freak out when I hear of deaths. Instead, I just slow down, check in on those who aren't on the checklist, and sit with the bereaved. It's not all deaths, just the ones that take your breath away when you weren't prepared and leave a hole larger than their diagnosis. That bell, whatever it is, has turned into a peculiar comfort, a whisper in the dark, a flash of mercy. Sometimes I hold a hand a little longer. Sometimes I simply listen. If you allow it, this work will hollow you out. Now, when the halls are quiet, the charting is finished, and my body hurts from another double shift, I listen, and if I hear that soft impossible ding, I go. It reminds me that what we do matters, that even at the quiet edge of life, something watches, something knows, and it gives us a moment, a warning, a gift. Make this count. In the quiet hours when the hospital hums with a kind of sacred stillness, you start to hear the things you normally wouldn't hear. I go to see because someone is slipping away somewhere, and I want to be there not to save them, but to witness them, to make sure they aren't alone when the last sound they hear isn't a machine or a code call, but the soft chime of something sacred coming to carry them home. I was 6 months into my nursing job at the time, barely steady enough to stop questioning every Tylenol dosage and every mile click. My mentor Shannon told me that during my orientation week at Ridgeway Medical Center, prior to Ridgeway, I had spent a year on a med-surg floor, which was always busy and noisy, with no quiet and no room to hear anything but overhead pages and beeping and shouting. I used to think that was experience, but now I'm not so sure. Ridgeway's step down ICU was different. The floor had this rhythm, moving slower, more deliberately. The patients were sicker, but the atmosphere was quieter. It was the type of unit where a nurse could enter a room and sense something was off before the monitors caught up. We were short on tech, so the nurses had been helping with turning, lifting, cleaning, everything. My badge kept catching on the med cart, so I just helped reposition Mr. Since it was the third of 3 consecutive night shifts, my body ached in ways I didn't know were possible. Sweat had dried into the fabric of my scrubs by the time I collapsed into the desk chair between rooms 15 and 17. I pulled up the charting screen, my fingers hovering just above the keys. Gallardo in 12A was a heavy post-abdominal surgery patient whose pain level made any movement an ordeal. We shared the corridor computers, so it wasn't unusual for someone to log in next to you without saying anything, especially on night shift when small talk dies about 2 a.m. But I didn't look. When I heard it move the gentle scrape of a chair being dragged out alongside me, then she said, "You should turn Mr. Brody in 21, with his skin beginning to puddle close to his sacrum." Her voice was scratchy, not like a smoker's, but rather like someone who had spent too much time in a hospital with too much dry air and too much coffee. She was calm and confident, like someone who had. She was wearing light blue scrubs, not the navy and Peter Ridgway ones that were issued now, and her badge was clipped at her pocket instead of the retractable lanyards that we all wore. I looked over, trying to read the name, but the plastic was clouded, as if it had been worn for decades. Before I could say anything, she turned the bend at the end of the corridor toward the staircase exit. Watch Lorna in 25. Her sats drop when she sleeps, and she sees things when she's low. Don't ignore it. I blinked, but she was already standing facing away. I walked back toward the station and sat down, my pulse pounding more than I cared to admit, after getting up and softly calling out, "Hey," but the hallway was empty. I checked the stairway, and nothing was there. I then went into the break room, which was empty, but for one of the senior nurses who was browsing through her phone. When I rolled Brody, I looked up his chart in room 21 and saw that he had no recent turns documented, was sedated, and was on the verge of stage 1 skin breakdown. There was something about her voice that resonated with me. It was calm, certain, and neither frantic nor demanding. His lower back was flushed a recognizable crimson. If he had missed another shift, he would have gotten worse before daylight. 20 minutes later, Laura Bailey's alarm went off from room 25. Her heart rate was fast, and the oxygen saturation was in the mid-7s. I hurried in. She clutched my wrist and whispered, "He's here again, the man, the one behind you." She was mouthing something over the nasal cannula, clawing at the sheets, and her eyes were wide. I increased her oxygen and helped her breathe. No one was behind me, so I waited with her until her levels returned to the low 90s before she finally fell asleep. Later, when it came time for handoff, I related the encounter to my charge, Nina, in passing, so as not to come out as insane. She stared. "No, not really." "Why?" I hesitated. "Do people still use the hallway computer station between 15 and 17? One of them had a malfunctioning keyboard. A nurse in light blue scrubs sat next to me for a brief period. She looked old school and didn't look familiar, but she stared at me for a few too long before saying, "You saw her, didn't you? Helen." I blinked. "Who?" Slowly, she nodded. "March, Helen, night nurse for more than 20 years, I passed. Perhaps 10 years ago, if I may. Aneurysm. On her night off, she would come in to drop off cookies. While they charted, I sat with one of the recent graduates, dead before the code crew could bring her to the ground. She collapsed in the middle of her sentence. I had a dry mouth. Her scrubs were a bright blue color. I muttered, always. Hospitalis was given out. The navy one she detested. No gave. A small smile. She occasionally appears. At night, always. To new nurses, always. She never frightens anyone. She merely assists. Then it vanishes. I was at a loss for words. How do you interpret that? A spectre, a lingering presence, a reverberation. I couldn't ignore the reality, though. Brody would have lost it if I hadn't turned him. Lorna might have coded if I hadn't stopped her drop. That wasn't a hallucination. Also, something more profound within me. Beyond my training, Rationality knew that I would never see her again. Not at all, however. Around 8 months later, there was this one night. Quick reaction in room 18, seizures, a crashing blood pressure, tangled 4 lines, and a panicked nurse were all symptoms of post-TPN. The sort of thing when your mind is divided. One side is yelling, the other is doing. In preparation for a phenylphryne bolus, I was examining the 4 pump settings. I heard it, I promise you. Verify the decimal again. Live. It was no more than a breath, a whisper. I took another look. I had almost administered 10 times the recommended dosage. The entry line's decimal had moved, a gloved finger slide. The sort of error that would have killed someone, but it didn't. I'm asked if I think ghosts exist. I'm at a loss for words. I believe in Helen, but not in the sort that slam doors or rattle chains. I think there are some people who genuinely adore this art. They adore the fact that they remain, they can't stop caring, not because they're afraid or want to exact revenge. I continued to work at night. I received better and more self-assured. However, occasionally on the verge of fatigue, when my mind wanders and my fingers linger on a keyboard, I half expect to hear a chair next to me scrape. There are moments when I hope because we know we're not alone in this profession, when the sadness becomes overwhelming and the weight of everything weighs on us. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us going in the hallways. If this tale provided you the chills, please remember to subscribe and hit the like button for more real-life nursing horror stories. Have you ever worked a night shift and sensed that someone or something was keeping an eye on you? Leave a comment with your tale below. Additionally, keep in mind that not all hauntings are bad. Some people have a calling that simply does not want to clock out. Be careful when you're out, especially during the calm hours.